Thank you. Come, come, whoever you are. You are welcome here. No matter your age, your size, the color of your eyes, your hair, your skin, you are welcome here. No matter your gender, whom you love, how you speak, or whatever your abilities, you are welcome here. You are welcome here whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears. You are welcome here. No matter what you've experienced in the past, no matter what awaits you in the future, you are welcome here. Whether you believe in God all of the time, some of the time, or none of the time, you are welcome here. This is a community of open minds, loving hearts, and willing hands. You are welcome here at South Valley Unitarian Universalist Society. And good morning, everyone. My name is Brenda Voizard, and my pronouns are she and her. And we have a few of us in the sanctuary to bring you the service this morning, and most everyone is at home in our virtual audience. We are so glad to be together that way. Our worship team consisted of Reverend Laura and Rob Carlson, our Director of Religious Education, and John Allen, our Director of Music, and Rick Nobis, always an amazing musician with us for years and years. And we have Bob Scarborough and Maureen Davies bringing sound, and I think Tina might be doing Zoom, and there's just so many people helping to make this happen this morning. We'd like to extend an especially warm welcome for anyone who found us for the first time. And if you'd like to get to know us more, we encourage you to fill out the connection card that's in the virtual order of service and is on our website. And we do have that religious exploration program for our children and youth. And today, I believe right after the service that kids can bring their stuffies for an overnight or a week-long camp, actually. Oh my gosh. How fun. And so Rob Carlson and Grace Montrome Burns help us with that. There's a lot happening here at South Valley, and the Happenings weekly newsletter is your best way to stay up to date. And so be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And we will remain virtual for January 23rd and 30th, and we will resume in person as soon as it's safe to do so. There is a Zoom social hour following the services, so be sure to tune into that if you'd like. And now we'll have our opening hymn.
Standing on these mountains and plains, far away
Let us light our chalice. We invite those of you at home who may have a candle or a chalice to light that as well. And say the words together that we say every Sunday. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, for the light of truth, and for the energy of action.
I am the Reverend Laura Young, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. As we gather this morning, let us remember that we do so on the ancestral and current homelands of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. And as Unitarian Universalists, we acknowledge the complex and violent history that resulted in the stealing of these lands and the cultural and physical genocide perpetuated against its peoples through the policies of colonial settlers. We commit ourselves to undoing these harms, and we seek to authentically and with honesty engage in the necessary work that will produce justice for the disenfranchised and that promotes healing for the whole of the earth and all of its peoples. And by peoples, I mean more than just the humankind. The peoples that are in animal bodies, plant bodies, tree bodies, sky bodies, feathered bodies, all of the peoples with whom we share this precious, beautiful blue boat. As we come into this time of worship, I call you just to settle your feet on the ground and to notice that now is the now that is here. There is no other now than this now, and then the next, and the next. And beloveds, I know we miss each other terribly right now. After 24, 25, however many months it has been that we have been riding this wave of the pandemic, we know that our spirits can feel a little frayed. Hold on. Hold on to one another. And do not fear. We will get through this together. We already have. And we are stronger and more connected than we have ever been as a community. We are truly interdependent. So let us gather together in this time of worship and be glad in it. Let us worship.
From the contemporary prophet, Dr. Seuss. Now, the star-bellied sneetches had bellies with stars, but the plain-bellied sneetches had none upon theirs. Those stars weren't so big. They were really so small, you might think such a thing wouldn't even matter at all. But because they had stars, all the star-bellied sneetches would brag, "We are the best kind of sneetch on the beaches." With their snoots in the air, they would sniff and they'd snort. We'll have nothing to do with the plain-bellied sort. And whenever they met some, when they were out walking, they'd hike right on past them without even talking. When the star-bellied children went out to play ball, could a plain belly get in the game? No, not at all. You could only play if your bellies had stars, and the plain-bellied children had none upon theirs. When the star-bellied sneetches had frankfurter roasts, or picnics, or parties, or marshmallow toasts, they never invited the plain-bellied sneetches. They left them out cold in the dark of the beaches. They kept them away. They never let them come near. And that is how they treated them year after year. Then one day, it seems, while the plain-bellied sneetches were moping and moping alone on the beaches, just sitting there wishing their bellies had stars, a stranger zipped up in the strangest of cars. "My friends," he announced in a voice clear and keen, "my name is Sylvester McMonkey McBean, and I've heard of your troubles, my friends. I've heard you're unhappy, but I can fix that. I'm the fix-it-up chappie. I've come here to help you. I have what you need. And my prices are low, and I work at great speed. And my work is 100% guaranteed. Then quickly, Sylvester McMonkey McBean put together a very peculiar machine. And he said, "You want stars like a star-bellied sneetch? My friends, you can have them for $3 each. Just pay me your money and hop right aboard." So they clambered inside, and the big machine roared. And it clonked, and it bonked, and it jerked, and it burked, and it bopped them about. But the thing really worked. When the plain-bellied sneetches popped out, they had stars. They actually did. They had stars upon theirs. Then they yelled at the ones who had stars at the start. "We're exactly like you. You can't tell us apart. We're all just the same now, you snooty old smarties. And now we can go to your Frankfurter parties." "Good grief," groaned the ones who had stars at the first. "We're still the best sneetches, and they are the worst." "But now, how in the world will we know?" they all frowned. "If which kind is what, or the other way around?" Then up came McBean with a very sly wink, and he said, "Things are not quite as bad as you think, so you don't know who's who. That's perfectly true. But come with me, friends. Do you know what I'll do? I'll make you, again, the best sneetches on beaches, and all it will cost you is just $10 eaches." "Belly stars are no longer in style," said McBean. "What you need is a trip through my star-off machine. This wondrous contraption will take off your stars, so you won't look like sneetches who have them on theirs." And that handy machine, working very precisely, removed all the stars from their tummies quite nicely. Then, with their snoots in the air, they paraded about, and they opened their beaks, and they let out a shout. "We know who is who. Now there isn't a doubt. The best kind of sneetches are the sneetches without." Then, of course, those with stars all got frightfully mad. To be wearing a star now, apparently, was frightfully bad. Then, of course, old Sylvester McMonkey McBean invited them into his star-off machine. Then, of course, from then on, as you probably guess, things really got in a horrible mess. All the rest of the day on those wild screaming beaches, the fix-it-up chappie kept fixing up sneetches. Off again, on again, in again, out again. Through the machines they raced round and about again, changing their stars every minute or two. They kept paying money. They kept running through until neither the plain nor the starbellies knew whether this one was that one, or that one was this one, or which one was what one, or what one was who. Then, when every last cent of their money was spent, the fix-it-up chappie packed up, and he went. And he laughed as he drove in his car up the beach. "Ah, they'll never learn. No, you can't teach a sneetch." But McBean was quite wrong, I'm happy to say, that the sneetches got really quite smart on that day. The day they decided that sneetches are sneetches, and no kind of sneetch is the best on the beaches. That day, all the sneetches forgot about stars, and whether they had one or not, upon theirs.
Thank you, Rob. This community, our church, and its many ministries are only made possible by the gifts all of us give of our time, our talent, and our treasure. Behind me is an example of talent, George Melling, who painted this many, many years ago in the 90s when we first put up our hate-free flag zone and our rainbow flag. And I'm happy to tell you that James, we saw him this morning putting up yet another new rainbow flag. Beautiful out there. Drive by and see. Many of us pledge monthly to support the work here, and for this we are grateful. The gifts ensure that we're able to live our values of love and justice in the world around us. Part of our ministry on Sundays involves sharing our Sunday worship offering with a charitable organization that aligns with our principles and values. And our Social Action Council has selected Comunidades Unidas as our offering split recipient for January and February. They're a local organization. They started in the 1990s, and they advocate and serve our local Latinx community. So please say the offering words with me and give as you are able and give generously. We are this church. We are its hands, its heart, its voice. Together we share the wealth of this community and sustain it with our gifts.
You'll notice that the musical numbers are different than printed in the order of service. This piece is an adagio by Bach.
For all we have received and all we have found the courage to give, may we be truly grateful. May these gifts be a blessing to South Valley and Comunidades Unidas. At this time, all are invited to share in our ritual of joys and sorrows in community. Those at home on Zoom may use the chat box to enter in a personal joy or sorrow to be read from the pulpit, and Brenda will drop a stone in our water here in the sanctuary to hold space and to remind us that our collective care does make a difference in the world. At the close of our ritual, we will add one final stone to represent those joys and sorrows that remain unnamed in our hearts. I would invite you, Brenda, to drop the first stone to represent those lives lost so far to COVID-19. As of this week, it is over 5.5 million people who have lost. And Scarborough shares a hope for healing for her sister Jean, who is hospitalized with a stroke. We add a stone for the healing of those in our community who are themselves struggling with COVID-19 this week, those in our community and our neighborhood. We add a stone for the hospital workers and the frontline staff. We had a joy for Girl Scout cookies. For me, it's Thin Mints that I'm grateful for every single year. I am grateful for our new flag and for our history of shining a bright beacon to the community that says, all are welcome here. And let us add one final stone to represent those joys and sorrows which remain unnamed on our heart. Oh, wait, one more from Laura and Scott Renshaw for both of Scott's parents who are ill at this time. Thank you. I invite all those gathered here in the sanctuary, my few people, to join me in a time of meditation and reflection, and for those at home, to just breathe in a little deeper. Perhaps close your eyes if you are comfortable. Sink your feet into the carpet or floor beneath you. Feel the backs of your chair or couch, and just breathe. Breathe into that space that you are inhabiting, and be still. Spirit of life, we seek to find a heart of gratitude in this day as we do in all days. May we be grateful for the sun that is shining today, for the warmth that it brings, however brief, to this valley. As a reminder of the warmth of this community that continues on. We ask, Spirit, that you would fill us with fortitude and courage to continue to walk the growing edges of our lives the life of this community and the edges that are growing and forming in the wider world. Fill us with the courage and the fortitude to show up for justice and to act with kindness in all that we do. May this community be a blessing for all that come in contact with us. May it be so. Amen.
Our reading is excerpts from a letter from Birmingham Jail, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., written in 1963. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well-timed, in quotes, according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I've heard the word, wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. It has been a tranquilizing formaldehyde, relieving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see that the distinguished jurist of yesterday, that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward the goal of political independence, and we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter.
The letter continues. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will, and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse and kick and brutalize and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see that the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see the tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the depressing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness towards white people. And you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking in agonized pathos, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?
Then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience.
And a last excerpt. And in this excerpt, Dr. King is talking to white clergy. I must confess, over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with the goal that you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And so ends the reading. As Unitarian Universalists, we take time on and around the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday to honor and celebrate his life and his legacy. His leadership and the leadership of thousands of others over the decades has steadily moved the conversation forward and resulted in policy changes that have supported greater equity and fairness for Black and Indigenous people of color. When I think of his life and legacy, I think most often of his ability to tell stories. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King understood the power of stories as transformative, and he used storytelling both as a means to encourage his fellow justice seeker, like Rabbi Israel Dessler, who just passed away this weekend, a freedom fighter who had a civil rights legacy in the Jewish community and was walking with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in the height of the civil rights movement. He used storytelling, Dr. King did, to encourage the fight for civil rights, for the building of intersectionality and solidarity, and as a means for making space for new understandings of humanity that will allow justice to take hold and grow strong upon the foundation of democracy. We are still on that growing edge. At times, it can feel very ragged on that edge. It can feel sometimes that for every step we have made forward, there are two steps pulling us back. But I do call us to remember that even as we are sometimes frustrated, often frustrated by the continuation of systemic racism and the brutality and the violence that our Black and brown siblings of faith must endure, that there is yet still a new understanding of race always being born, a new understanding of how to combat this form of racism. And that is due in large part to a multiplicity of voices sharing the storytelling about what is needed to realize justice and how to get there. When it comes to liberation from systemic injustices and the fulfillment of new spaces where our siblings of color may define, express, and celebrate their lives without comparison to white standards, we have quite a bit of road to travel yet. But that is the nature of our current work, to listen and observe the ways in which automatic assumptions of, say, universal experience, which is a code word for white experience and white identity, are acting to erase and suppress critical conversations that could allow racial trauma to heal and joyful liberation to take root. This is not easy work to undertake or sustain. Wherever we find ourselves in this context, the language of expectations, the ways in which we talk and learn about racism, it can be confusing. Yes, there has been progress. And if Reverend Dr. King were here today, I am certain he would be pointing to vaccine inequities, social and economic inequality, and ongoing racism embedded in our systems of justice as key areas to investigate and reform. The moral arc of the universe is long, and bending it towards justice is never quite completely accomplished. As Unitarian Universalists, we have long sought to firmly and with resolve consistently side with our siblings of color to bring forth policy changes that support justice, equity, and freedom for Black and Indigenous people of color. We are a people of goodwill. And this is a critical part of our foundational story as a faith tradition and in our own lives. And it is true also at the same time that our denomination has made serious mistakes and inflicted harm, often unconsciously and without malintent, but lack of intent is no excuse for continuing to ignore the questions that call us to accountability. Many of our congregations over the last couple of years have undertaken the task of considering an eighth principle that calls us to be specifically and wholeheartedly embraced and engaged in the work of racial justice as primary to our faith journey. And last May, South Valley voted to undertake a time of study and reflection on this proposed eighth principle. Our principles as a faith movement, 7 currently, eighth under consideration, are not a creed, are not a doctrine, they're not an inviolable tradition, they are rather living documents that seek to keep us responsive to the ongoing revelation of truth from diverse sources that lie at the heart of our movement. We are the only religious tradition. We are the only religious tradition that holds such flexibility as core to the expression of faith. Within our denomination, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, or BLUU, B-L-U-U, as it is called, the eighth principle, quote, came from a feeling that we need to create something new, to renew our commitment to this work, to hold ourselves accountable, and to fulfill the potential of our existing principles. BLUU and other advocates for racial justice within our movement note that while we have much to be proud of as Unitarian Universalists when it comes to commitments to justice within our movement, we continue to have work to do. Given our national history of chattel slavery and Jim Crow and the mass incarceration of Black people, brutality by the police, and recent Supreme Court rulings that have undermined, as well as state laws gone into effect that have undermined voting rights, explicitly engaging in this work is critical if we hope to remain relevant as a faith community. The authors of the eighth principle call us to understand that just as we have transformed our systems to be more inclusive of women, the LGBTQ plus community, and differently abled folks, we can and will do the same with our Black and Indigenous siblings of color. So we already know we can do this work. And we can, and we are doing it again. This time with an explicit focus on what it takes to heal racial oppression systemically for the good of the whole. The proposed eighth principle reads as thus, if you haven't read it in a while. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying toward spiritual wholeness. Journeying toward spiritual wholeness by building a diverse and multicultural beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. As a white Unitarian Universalist minister, I am called to this work personally and professionally. And I'll share with you an experience that I had that allowed me to gain insight into my own embedded racism, my own participation unwillingly in systems of oppression. My first year in seminary, during the very first week, all of my cohort of seminarians were invited into a seminar called Identity, Power, and Difference. And it was a week-long process of understanding our roles in society, where we have power, where we express power, or perhaps we lack power. And over the course of that week, we began to understand that all of us have so many different identities. And I remember very specifically, there was an activity toward the end of the week where we were given small slips of paper and the instructions that we were going to act out a scene. And the scene that my small group of 6 seminarians was given the task of being on a southern plantation. And some of us were to be the slave owners, and some of us were to be the slaves. And you could hear a pin drop when they gave us this assignment. None of us wanted to do that assignment. But being the good seminarians that we were, we knew that there was something important to be learned here. I think the hardest part in that moment for me, when we've divided up our roles and I was elected to be the southern matriarch of the plantation and to drink tea, and my job was to then treat my Black colleague terribly for a moment. I knew exactly what to do. And that was the moment that I realized it's embedded in me. Because I have never treated anyone poorly because of their race or their sexual orientation or their gender. And yet my body knew how to hold itself. My mind could hear the words that I ought to say. And bless my colleague for being willing to help us to see. It was one of the best and the worst experiences of my life. And I walked away from that knowing that there's no escaping systemic racism unless we begin to have those critical reflections of self in which we acknowledge that no matter how unwilling We are inextricably locked up in this system, and that the only way forward is to be intersectional, to be intentional, and to be focused on the very micro behaviors that have been embedded in our psyches and have shaped our identities as white, as black, as abled, as disabled, as straight or gay, binary or non-binary, whatever it is that we have been washed in, that the only way forward is to be honest. And so I come to you as a white clergy person this morning on the weekend of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's birth, and I ask us, as a community, as individuals and as a community, please step in today. You've already been stepping in, and I am so proud of the work that this community has already done. Let us not forget that it is going to take longer than our individual lives to move the needle towards greater justice, but that this is not a work we undertake because of the feelings of achievement or accomplishment that it will bring. We do it because it is the right and moral thing to do. One way that South Valley has already been living into these commitments has been on multiple levels. At each board meeting for the last year, we have been discussing racism as it is present in our institution with guidance from the Unitarian Universalist Associations. These conversations have been productive and illuminating for each of us individually and as a leadership team. The board has been engaged in this conversation because we know that what we do and how we construct ourselves matters. Another area of inquiry has been on bringing non-white perspectives into worship through spoken word and music, guest speakers, and other multimedia content over the last year. Additionally, staff in religious exploration have participated in training on anti-racism, and we regularly discuss and explore emerging needs and insights that will support our programming to be anti-racist. Our book group, our social action team, our welcoming team, each of our teams has been tasked with considering what are the next steps that we must take as a faith community to become increasingly anti-racist. This is not a work that is one and done. It is a process of learning, reflection, and insight. And we undertake this work because we are a faith founded on the premise that all people have worth and dignity. There seems no better time than now, and now, and now, to acknowledge more boldly that love is the force that supports us all, weaves us together, and calls us to fulfill our humanity anew. Our work in this area is worthy of our time, our talent, and treasure. We will not rush, we will not skip over, but we will focus so that as a congregation, our conversations will be rich and deep, truthful, gentle, and accountable. Our siblings within our denomination have stayed with us and are calling us again to show up for and alongside them as we find our way forward. And it is my hope that here at South Valley, we will continue to be thoughtful, truthful, and engaged, and that we will embrace what is best for us as a united community. May it be so, and amen.
10:18, come and go with me.
Yes. We will be extinguishing our chalice now. You can extinguish yours at home and join us in the words that we say every Sunday. We extinguish this chalice, but not the warmth of love, the light of truth, or the energy of action. We hold each other in our hearts until we meet again.
As we prepare to go forth from this time and this place of worship, may you go forth with a full heart for justice, with those helping hands ready to maybe seek out a new friendship or plant a new garden, to share and break bread. Well, actually, I probably can't do that right now because of COVID, but to do those things virtually, which would make sense and would be safe, to connect to one another. Pick up that book of poetry you have lying on your shelf. Flip through it and read something that you haven't before. And be well. Be good to one another and be a blessing. Amen. We'll have our postlude and then a 10-minute break, and then we'll have our social hour online for those of us who would like to connect on Zoom.
This is called Pleading by Edward Elgar. Will you come homeward from the hills of dreamland, home in the dusk, and speak to me again? Tell me the stories that I am forgetting. Quicken my hope and recompense my pain.
grown weary, though I wait you yet, watching the fallen leaf, the faith grown fainter, the memory smoldered to a dull regret. Shall the remembrance die in dim forgetting?